Well, hello again, and thank you. Some good responses on the What is Religion, and a few already there addressing the Karen Armstrong video. I just wanted to give a few thoughts on that as we wrap up this unit. A couple things to think about as we discuss, what is religion? How do we define religion? Um, Something to keep in mind is really when you define religion, especially when we're studying religion, we're not just talking about spirituality or personal belief. It would really be almost impossible to study that on any significant level, because you'd be studying individuals, other than maybe a psychology of religion, like how people tend to think about religion regardless of the other differences, kind of that human element, which is interesting, but that's not what we're looking at kind of in exploring world religions. We're looking at these major world religions, which raises some issues. One of the things I didn't talk about much at the end of the first discussion, but I did ask, what's the difference between religion and superstition, or between miracle and magic? I had those articles about demon possession and looking at kind of the sense of the spiritual. But then I also gave that article about my friend's grandfather with his miracle of the corn and the kind of the sign of the corn with the cross on it. There is a difference between miracle and magic. There's a difference between religion and superstition. And it's good to think about those things and take those differences seriously. Superstition is about kind of cause and effect. It's sort of a spiritual, a good word to use is to know is preternatural. So in a lot of sense we have the natural world, the supernatural world. There are those things that don't really quite fit in either, especially in the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Really the supernatural belongs to God. The natural is the human realm, the physical human realm that we kind of experience, that I can pick something up, I can touch it, I can see it, I can taste it, the five senses. It follows certain sort of laws, natural order, physical things that can be measured, chemical things that can be observed. That's the natural world. The supernatural world, technically especially in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, have to do with the acts of God. But there's another realm within most religions. It's kind of the spiritual, kind of this middle ground, and that's where demons often fall, the preternatural. There are other acts, magic, and sort of mysteries, kind of things that don't exactly follow natural patterns, things that we would consider weird, odd, or irregular, things that sort of tap into a soulish, intuitive power, but aren't necessarily a connection to God, or a God, or a sense of the ultimate, but it's something kind of in this middle realm. In our modern world, the reason I use the demon stories because I think that fits in that middle world, and that's one of the things that the modern world has kind of moved away from. For exploring world religions, we're really wanting to look primarily at the kind of core traditions that have sort of stood the test of history, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, but these we need to understand are, we talk about kind of an orthodoxy, a sort of standard of belief, a core belief, but people from all those religions have like varying practices and beliefs that may or may not be part of that religion. We can't study all those. So a lot of religion scholars are averse to studying a religion in an orthodox sense per se. I try to look for, and we'll talk about this more even as we get into the Hinduism thing, I try to look for a core view that kind of is true, that people may add things onto or take little bits off of or bring other things and mix with it, but these core ideas, maybe core scriptures, core persons, these are at the center no matter what kind of expression whether personalized or localized or regionalized, denominational, whatever, that there's this core to these faith systems. So as we talk about, what is religion, how do you define religion, I think some things to keep in mind to help us are things like it's in a community. We're not just talking about the individual. I think there are beliefs, and I'm going to talk about Karen Armstrong's thing and why I use that in a minute. But doctrines do matter, and we'll talk about that. But practices, doctrines, traditions that happen in a community, a kind of a shared sense of the world and usually having to do with the ultimate. A lot of times we use the word God. I hesitate to use the word God because there are some things that fall into the realm of religion that don't really have a personal God per se. Certain expressions of Hinduism and certainly a lot of expressions of Buddhism, there isn't a God or gods in the personal sense that takes a very central place as the ultimate. So kind of a communal expression in practice and belief and doctrine about what's ultimate in life and its effects and relations to human existence. Something along those lines, I think, captures a lot of what would cover a variety of things without being so broad that it becomes useless, right? If we just say spiritual ideas, how do you begin to study spiritual ideas? That becomes very broad and very difficult to do. So, on to Karen Armstrong's idea. She shies away from the idea of beliefs and doctrines. Now she's reacting to a modern emphasis on ideas. Beliefs meaning what you think, right? If I believe something, I think it. And she's right to critique that, but I think her critique is very, very Buddhist, and she overstates it in the case of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, maybe even in the case of Hinduism. Her answer is very Buddhist. It's the Buddha who says that doctrine isn't the issue about these kind of ultimate things of who created the world or whatever. I would offer that those things actually do matter, but I come from a kind of Christian background. So from the Judeo-Christian Islamic standpoint, your understanding of reality affects what you do. The point of the practices is that you're in relation to this God. And so doctrines about who this God is affects who you're relating to. Right? So the doctrines do matter. Now, what she says about the idea of faith. I noticed in some of our responses, people will talk about faith as that which is unprovable. They do have that sense of it's just a mental thing. It's just ideas that you have. This seem kind of important or affect your kind of spiritual practices. But that's not what faith, the Greek word in the Christian context of pistis, the idea of faith in the Jewish context, the idea of faith for the Muslim, isn't merely about ideas. Armstrong is right on this. For the Apostle Paul or Jesus or Muhammad or Moses or the Hebrew prophets, the idea of faith is about a total and complete allegiance. In fact, there's a really great book out right now called "By Allegiance Alone" by Matthew Bates, a Notre Dame University of Notre Dame PhD, teaches at Quincy. And he talks about how the word pistis, the word for faith in Greek in the Christian context, has to do with a total devotion of your life, a total allegiance to. You show faith not just by having certain ideas, but by living a life in total allegiance to these realities, to this person, to this being who is God. So there's definitely is something to Armstrong's critique of our tendency towards belief. But there again, her critique is very Buddhist, and I think it oversteps quite a bit, when we're dealing with Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and potentially even Hinduism. And I think honestly, in the Buddhist context, it is sort of a metaphysical claim that the creation of the world doesn't really matter. Well, okay, it's because in some sense there's a metaphysical claim that the physical world is just illusion anyway, so why does it matter that much? So that metaphysical claim actually does have a certain bearing on how you react, how you think you should live. How much emphasis you think you should put on those types of claims comes out of your belief about those types of claims. So you can't dismiss doctrine from it, I think, even from a Buddhist perspective, and that would be my only thing. But again, I do think her critique is helpful in recognizing that our modern sense of belief and faith as kind of ideas that we hold on to in a very mental, cerebral, distant sort of sense is not what religious peoples historically have meant by faith. Faith isn't just ideas about things that are unprovable. It actually does bear out in practice. It's not merely personal. It does bear out in relation to the community and to God as a being. We do, as modern people, tend to see faith as this kind of personal, individual thing. That's not the case for most religious systems throughout most of human history. It's a very communal reality. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and even if you look at the ancient kind of polytheistic, Greco-Roman or any really kind of ancient sort of polytheistic religious system, you had communal gods and communal practices. In fact, Socrates is killed for not necessarily being in line with the communal gods on some level. Christians in the early Roman Empire are persecuted as atheists, not because they deny a belief in God as a whole, but because they won't participate in the communal celebrations of the communal gods that should bring kind of good luck, well-being, good fortune to the community. So they're seen as, in some sense, as bad citizens, because religion is not just about their personal sense of God, it's about their involvement in the community. So keep that in mind as you think about what Armstrong said, as you think about your definition of religion and what that means. It's very real. To not, it can be difficult to not kind of slip into that very modern American individualistic sense of just ideas up here. Those ideas are at the heart of a whole active communal, practiced reality of life.